And I invite Dr. Jihan Selim, Associate Professor in Architecture and Urbanism at the University of Leeds, to chair this session. So welcome, Jihan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation and for all the hard effort for the Praxis team that are putting behind all this amazing discussions that have been taking place since the early of this week. So it's really a delight to be here today with all of you. And good morning, everyone joining us today. I think we have 117 with us online now on Zoom, so that's really amazing to see the hype and engagement with what we're trying to present today. And I'm also delighted that we have also a brilliant lineup of speakers today, so really looking forward to the discussions and the presentations that will come shortly. I will start by introducing myself. So as Francesca said, I'm Dr. Jihan Selim, and I'm an architect and associate professor of architecture and urbanism at the University of Leeds. I was also the fellow of the Senator George Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice at Queen's University Belfast. And I also lead the architecture and urbanism research cluster at Leeds. And I was also fortunate that working with a team in Jordan that we were the recipient of the Newton Prize 2020 award this year, where I was a co-investigator on that amazing work. So that's just a little bit background about me. What is the session about today and what we're aiming to do and why we're gathering and the scope of the presentation? I think this is really important to talk about. And the use of digital technologies for heritage analysis, recording, reconstruction, display and transmission for future generation is at the fourth line of interdisciplinary innovation. And it has proven to be the key ally part practically in contexts where heritage is at risk of disappearance and has already been destroyed or damaged by war in conflict zones and climate change, earthquakes, environmental disasters, and other harmful events. On the other side as well, the use of media, technology, platforms, and digital softwares and tools like digital modeling, immersive and augmented reality, virtual exhibitions and site tours, using mobile apps and many, many other methods and ways can provide cultural institutions and museums and governmental bodies, academic institutions, and other stakeholders with digital alternatives to physical heritage preservation. And there's a kind of way of enjoyment in increasing also the heritage awareness and accessibility and working up with bottom-up approaches as opposed to the old model. So, however, while digital heritage stems from different communities, industries, sectors, and regions, not all digital materials are of enduring value, but those that require active preservation approaches in continuity of digital heritage is also to be maintained. So, one of the important questions that we're trying to pose today in the session is that, is there an emerging digital heritage? And to answer this, let's consider three important aspects. First is that resources of human knowledge or expression, whether cultural, educational, or scientific, or embracing technical, legal methods and kinds of information which is increasingly created digitally or even converted into digital form from existing resources. The second is that digital material including text and databases, moving and static visuals, audio graphics, softwares, and web pages are frequently short-lived, and they hence require what I call creative production and reproduction, including maintenance and management of all this material to be retained for a longer period of time. The third and final element of this is that many of these resources have lasting value and significance, and therefore they constitute a heritage that should be protected and preserved for current and future generations. And this heritage may exist in any language, in any part of the world, and in any human knowledge or expression. So this is more of a global phenomena that we're all trying to look at. So the aim of this crossing session today that we're looking at is to explore ways to maximize the use of digital technologies to innovate in heritage research, policy, and practice for sustainable development. And a number of key questions will be addressed to look at that and to stimulate that discussion. like how can digital technologies provide new ways to engage with different forms of heritage and amplify marginalized voices, and how it could be used to better inform decision-making and processes and practical actions. So I will not talk too much, and I hope that we're able to stimulate the discussion today around the formation of a research agenda, action plan, and policy briefs for better implementation and use of cultural heritage for sustainable development. So we're going to have three presentations, three exciting and brilliant presentations today, and I'll start to introduce them one by one. The first presentation is titled, How Can Digital Technology Support Cultural Heritage? Debating Theoretical Dispositions, Practical Challenges, and Policy Implications. And this talk will be delivered by Professor Mohammed Gamal Abdelmanan. So just a brief introduction about Gamal. He's a chair in architecture and the director of the Center of Architecture, Urbanism and Global Heritage at Nottingham Trent University. He's also the fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and he's the university lead of the strategic research stream Global Heritage and co-lead of the Cultural Heritage Research Peak. Gamal's talk will stimulate a number of prompts for a research debate on the viability of digital technology as effective tools for cultural heritage and sustainable development. So welcome, Gamal, and the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Jihan, and thanks the Praxis team, and thanks for Telly and Francesca. Really, we have been asked to develop a provoking presentation. So we deliberately agreed to disagree in our presentations today in order to really facilitate conversations. So my talk will be about the digital technology and how it can support the cultural heritage. And I will be looking at theoretical dispositions, practical challenges, and policy implications. But first, just to give a bit of background, I lead a Center for Architecture, Urbanism, and Global Heritage, where we really look at and work with many communities for the preservation and democratizing cultural heritage. We feel strongly about heritage belongs to communities, not tourism, not international organizations, and hence we try to develop advanced virtual heritage technologies, applications, and processes that engage with them and try to help them record it. But also we have to work with different stakeholders, governments, and partners. And hence I'm using a number of projects that we have used over the past few years in order to really give an evidence of the debate points I'm raising today. So just in general, we'll be looking at how we can use smart heritage preservation in virtual environments for heritage sites, but also how to develop more informative and progressive models for engaging technologies in a productive and economic way, but also how it could be an active preventive and element to preserve disappearing and endangered heritage. And as you can see here, we have a range of projects that really contribute to that debate. So we'll start with the theoretical disposition, and I frame my conversation around 5 questions. And the first one, can digital technologies act as an effective agent of heritage protection, of preventive of destruction and disappearance? And here is a point that theoretically we can argue that everything that we do is heritage. Everything that we do, everyday life, is informed by heritage, by culture, and it changes with time. But only it becomes much valuable element when it starts to disappear, when it gets destroyed. And this is a kind of a common in the cultural heritage and history fields, as we value heritage only when we start to feel it is endangered. And here we're just referring to a project that we are leading on Mosul, and how actually digital heritage can help when a historic city that stayed there for hundreds of years actually is gone or started to really disappear. Interesting thing, once cities and places disappear, people move and becomes a displacement of communities. And with the disappearance of people and spaces, then becomes a disappearance of art and culture and accordingly heritage. So in order for technologies to help to do that, it's a way that really we can connect with communities. We record their practices, and we can record the way of life, way of living. And in addition, we are actually utilizing heritage laser scanning and digital documentation tools to record that heritage historic buildings before they are being demolished, or try to help using previous records in order to reconstruct certain elements of them. And this is not to negate the nature of heritage being really in change over all time. But also we do that in places like in Nottingham, when we have recorded the history of the lace market and associated histories that disappeared actually from the old city of Nottingham. I'm trying to really record that historic buildings, the processes that exist only in the archives and the social history, and try to combine them again and display them to the public, effectively reviving that heritage and try to help it to evolve over time. Second question about how digital technologies made access to cultural heritage more exclusive or inclusive. And here there are certain ways, like in Nottingham Castle on the left, when you cannot see only the relationship between the Nottingham Castle and the caves underneath, or layers of pyramid in Cairo, in Egypt, and Fayoum, Hawara pyramid, until you overlay data, you are overlaying and recorded digitally lots of information, put them together. In that sense, technology can really help us see what you cannot see in real life. First, Hawara pyramid, for example, have hundreds of different objects across 45 museums across the globe, but actually the site itself is deprived of much of that. Nottingham Castle, here you've got a huge network of caves underneath, you cannot see it, and many people who are having disability cannot really visit it. But also young generations that we cannot ignore, that they are more interested in engaging with technology and mobiles and so on. Interestingly, there are also technology can help us bridge time and space, really overlaying scenes, historical versions of this past, and then bring it to real life now to understand why we are doing what we are doing today. Interestingly, to me, is that heritage is much more about knowledge. It's about the embedded knowledge and cultural learning that really inform what we do today, rather than just the mere objects of tangible heritage. And hence, the technology in that sense just gives you a much more real sense of how these disparate elements of that heritage can really piece together and put together, and how to engage with them, and how to allow people who can never have engaged with that heritage through digital means. So it's an additional tool rather than a replacement tool. Third question, what value and step change in cultural and heritage preservation have digital technologies brought? And actually here I'm reflecting on the pyramid, Hawara pyramid in Egypt, when it is actually a very historic 4,000 years old pyramid with, as I mentioned before, with plenty of problems because there's a lot of underground water. The chambers is actually submerged underground. And there's a lot of effort for a mud brick made kind of pyramid to be saved from such underground water. But also the collections that are spread and has been very important throughout history and captured a lot of imagination with the labyrinth mystical stories. But how to save that? It's actually having laser scanned the whole site. We were able for the first time to record to the tiny millimeters the details of that structure, its materials, and try to map the environment around it, including underground water, the thermal modeling of that pyramid, and how it behaves most time. Because one of the things to save it in order to dewater the underground is actually the whole structure could collapse because of the water moisture within that structure. Here, working with multiple teams, multiple geophysicists, the digital model becomes the central piece. It's actually where we simulate any action before it takes place. Question 4, does digital technology compromise the economic viability of heritage institutions? Here is a very interesting thing, and that's the argument we have been talking about it for the past 5 years, that museums are actually needs visitors, needs foot on the floor. But we cannot really undermine the way that they are being issues struggling with coping with new generations, increasing outreach beyond the local limits, and with travel restrictions in some places, it's becoming troubling. But here we looked through Museums of Future project that has been running for 3 years, how we can actually try not only to provide 360 like the British museums do or other museums do, but actually how to interact with that museum environment. How we can really make a real life experiences, not only to visit the spaces that you can visit online in real term, but actually how you can really bring from our storage 80% of their collections. And not that only, but actually how you create and curate your own galleries. You just see, if you, instead of just watching 50 or 60 paintings, you can really create thematic paintings and galleries that belongs to your own preferences. And you can share it with other people. So actually you can create a atmospheres, thematic displays that really suit your own taste. But also, you can actually add further value by having objects, interactive galleries, where you can really put three-dimensional objects and get people to learn from them. Again, this is not to replace existing galleries, but actually to help people engage with that a bit more. Question 5, if digital technology is here to stay, how do we regulate them? Because this is a big challenge. And this is for international governments, and we work with governments on that, because even the UK, like the US, Japan, Australia, and even the Middle East, very hard to regulate digital technologies, as perhaps Tim will talk about it later. But just we have worked with them on a research policy document. What are the concerns? What are the digital and ethical implications of working with digital heritage? But interestingly, you need to educate governments. You need to educate them about how to have and manage access to such high capacity technologies, primarily possessed by private sector. And in that sense, we really, as Egyptian governments, when we work with them, that they have developed a huge vast of collection of the heritage site visits, which is actually helped them a lot during the lockdown, and managed a huge promotion to their heritage sites, and helped many SMEs and local practitioners, which we trained during that project, to really manage these resources. So there's a lot of infrastructures and management here. Sorry, just this is the final thing. We know that and appreciate digital technologies mean different things to different people, and this is a kind of a number of array of projects and partners that we try to understand and see how technology could help them. So there's a different perceptions, and we think, while digital technologies can support public and open access to cultural heritage, access to essential knowledge, infrastructure, and resources is not equal. Thanks, Jehan, and sorry for a few seconds more.
Thank you so much, Gamal. I think, no, that's perfect. You're exactly on time. So thanks for managing this. For everyone participating, I'll just keep the questions until the end of the session. And if you have any question that you would like to raise, you please use the chat box to include your session, and I'll try to collect them all from there for the discussion Q&A session we'll have at the end. Our next presentation and next talk is titled Digital Technologies in Heritage Research Policy and Practices, Perspectives from Sierra Leone. And this is going to be presented by Ms. Isatu Smith and Professor Paul Basso. So Isatu is the Managing Director of the West African Heritage Consultancy, and she was project manager for the World Monuments Fund Preservation Project and was chairperson of the Monuments of Relics Commission of Sierra Leone. She is a trustee of the West Africa Shared Cultural Heritage Trust and member of the International Advisory Board of the International African American Museum in South Carolina. Co-presenting as well is Paul, who is a professor of anthropology at SOAS University of London. And for many years, his regional specialization has focused on West Africa. And he works on issues concerning cultural memory, heritage, museums, and archives, with a particular interest in contemporary decolonization debates. I understand that the presentation is going to be recorded. So if the recording could be ready now, Francesca. And the talk will look at the use of digital technologies in providing access to heritage assets and collections by connecting tangible and intangible heritage, and most important, connecting people to and through heritage as well. So looking forward to the presentation, and welcome to both speakers.
Hello, I am Isatu Smith from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I'm the Managing Director of the West Africa Heritage Consultants Limited and the immediate past chairperson of the Monuments and Relics Commission, which is the government's heritage agency.
And I'm Paul Basso, an anthropologist currently based at SOAS University of London. Over the years, Isatu and I have collaborated on a number of heritage projects in Sierra Leone. I'd like to talk briefly about a project called Reanimating Cultural Heritage, one of the outcomes of which was the Sierra Leone Heritage Digital Resource, which has been adopted by the Sierra Leonean National Museum as its official website. Isatu will then go on to talk about a heritage education initiative that partly grew out of the Reanimating Cultural Heritage project. There are, of course, many applications of digital technologies in heritage. Our contribution to the panel is really focused around digital access to heritage heritage collections, the use of digital technologies in connecting tangible and intangible heritage, and digital approaches to connecting different publics to and through heritage. The very fact that we can make this joint presentation from our respective locations in London and Freetown attests to the power of digital technologies to connect people and facilitate collaboration. The fact that we had to be creative and pre-record our presentation, however, also reminds us that the digital is not a frictionless medium. The majority of people outside Sierra Leone's major towns live without access to electricity, let alone computers, and even in cities such as Freetown, internet access is limited and bandwidth is poor. Although the situation has changed dramatically in the 12 years since the Reanimating Cultural Heritage project started, the digital divide remains an unavoidable fact that must temper any claims about digital affordances. And this, of course, needs to be taken into account when designing any kind of digital project in many African countries. One of the motivations behind the Reanimating Cultural Heritage project was a recognition of the relative poverty of Sierra Leone's National Museum and its collections when compared with museums with major Sierra Leonean collections outside Sierra Leone itself. Both the quality and quantity of Sierra Leonean artefacts dispersed in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, for example, far outshone that available in Sierra Leone. Drawing on migration and development studies concepts, we wondered what remittances this object diaspora might make to Sierra Leone, what kinds of value could flow from museums in the UK, for instance, to Sierra Leone. At the heart of the project was the creation of a digital resource that would bring together digitised Sierra Leonean collections from UK museums with those at the Sierra Leone National Museum. And it would explore ways of using digital media, especially video, to bring these collections to life. Following the decade-long civil war, the National Museum's collections and facilities were in a bad state, and the project involved a sustained engagement with the museum, supporting staff in a wide range of activities, including a collections audit, recataloguing, photographing collections, and improving storage and display. For many people, the museum had little attraction. It was regarded as a dusty place full of old, dead things, and people had little motivation to visit. So one of the ways in which we sought to reanimate these lifeless objects was through a participatory video project, in which we provided some equipment, training and modest budgets, and ran a series of workshops for different groups in which they would create a series of short digital films on different aspects of Sierra Leone's heritage based on objects in the museum's collection. Over 60 such video documentations were made, all accessible on the Sierra Leone Heritage website. The videos are embedded in corresponding object pages in the digital catalogue that was created. Here, for example, is one on the balangi or xylophone. I'll just play a short clip of this one.
First. We've been there, pan the wall, what them bring, then chicken pan inside, we culture daddy them tongue. Then bring canaya, then can learn me. Now they ask you for see, well, what would not begin sabi so? I would not do that. If you will not do tomorrow, say well, if you will not do tomorrow, we see we not for see. First people there, we not the first people there, we not they go na bush. We not go find this special trick. It ain't a bush, special trick. Una can make her. We see how una the maker. We chef. So the sense of una who been get, now we chef too.
Importantly, the project involved re-engagement with the newly accessible collections offline as well as online, and we conducted a lot of research with communities throughout Sierra Leone. This provided an opportunity to distribute archival images to locations in which they were taken during the colonial era, and also an opportunity to discuss heritage issues such as threats to the historical environment, particularly around, say, historic trees and timber extraction. At the time the Sierra Leone Heritage website was completed, internet access even in Freetown was still extremely limited. There were, however, internet cafes with dial-up connections, and an increasing number of schools had computer labs. In an effort to bridge this digital divide then, we distributed copies of the digital resource on DVDs to internet cafes, school computer labs and other hubs. We encouraged teachers to copy the resource onto their computers' hard drives and to use the resource in their IT teaching. At the same time, we were aware that history had long since been dropped from the school curriculum, and students had little opportunity to learn about their culture and heritage at school because there were so few teaching resources. Thus, we also ran workshops for teachers with the National Museum, working both with the Sierra Leone Heritage Resource and encouraging them to explore object-based learning techniques using the collections of the museum. Alongside this, we worked with teachers at a number of schools to establish extracurricular school heritage clubs, again making use of the digital resource. These turned out to be quite a success story, particularly when Sierra Leone's Monuments and Relics Commission began supporting this initiative. So let me now pass over to Isatu Smith, who will tell us more about the school history clubs and again how they've made use of digital technologies in their work.
The idea of using school heritage clubs to promote heritage education among the youth in Sierra Leone was reintroduced in 2015. 10 school heritage clubs were set up with the goal of promoting, preserving, and sharing their cultural heritage. They engaged in a number of educational activities, showcasing various aspects of both their tangible and intangible heritage over time. In 2017, following the conviction that we must focus much of our work on heritage education on the youth, the Monuments and Relics Commission collaborated with 2 other African countries, Uganda and Zimbabwe, to organize a cross-cultural school heritage club competition. All 3 countries are members of the International National Trust Organization, which organized and funded the competition. The concept was very simple. Youth from each country's heritage clubs will select one aspect of their heritage and culture that they wish to showcase to the other 2 countries. This was to ensure that young people from Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, and Uganda will develop a better appreciation of the diverse heritage across the continent and become more effective in its preservation. This was to be achieved through an electronic platform learning network related to heritage conservation, meant to strengthen the skills of our organizations in delivering more effective heritage education programs for youth in a globalized but diverse world. Noting the unique challenges that each country faces with regards to accessing and using digital technology, we had to devise creative solutions to overcome the limitations. We noted that some of these schools were in rural and remote areas that were not connected to the electricity grids and had little or no access to the internet. We also noted that some of the youth were unfamiliar with the simple digital technology that was necessary for the success of this cross-cultural exchange. The competition, entitled Heritage Education, Youth Linking Minds Across the Continent, was aimed at creating spaces for intercultural learning from various parts of Africa. Students under the age of 20 were invited to submit a short original video clip recorded on a cell phone, showing the world their unique heritage by sharing an original experience or activity of their heritage club, which they felt was exciting. Young people from each of the countries selected a winner from another participating country, which resulted in 3 first competition winners who each won a cash prize. Overall, the entries covered a diverse range of cultural themes and activities. The videos were communicative and generally easy to understand and very lively and compelling to watch. During the competition, there were inter-country exchanges of experiences as members of each of the heritage clubs learned about the other country's culture and heritage, which led to an increased understanding and appreciation of just how important it is to keep it alive. Solidarity and cultural respect among young people across continents can provide energy and solutions to heritage preservation. This case study illustrates how simple digital technology was used to overcome challenges and to successfully bridge the gap between use of 3 countries by using simple smartphones to record and share aspects of their heritage and culture.
To conclude, we'd like to highlight just a couple of points that these case studies raise. Firstly, these initiatives are, of course, underpinned by a conviction of the value of culture and heritage in strengthening social well-being. The idea behind the Reanimating Cultural Heritage project was firstly that static museum objects in places like Sierra Leone, which inspire little interest, especially among younger people, could be brought to life through digital media initiatives, and that this would in turn reinvigorate cultural institutions such as Sierra Leone's National Museum. The question then becomes whether such institutions can be mobilised to contribute to a broader social reanimation in contexts such as Sierra Leone's. Secondly, relating to the theme of this panel, is a recognition that such projects need to address issues around restricted digital access and bridge the digital and non-digital in their design. As much, if not more, effort in the Reanimating Cultural Heritage project was devoted to working with different stakeholders, museum staff, rural communities, teachers, school children and so on, in face-to-face contexts. And finally, despite the digital divide, people are resourceful and creative, making use of what technologies they do have access to. This is particularly well illustrated in ISA2's discussion of the International Heritage Club collaboration, in which school kids use their mobile phones to both create digital films about their heritage and use them to share their videos with clubs in Zimbabwe and Uganda, for instance. This reinforces the need to always develop projects collaboratively with partners familiar with local constraints and possibilities.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for the amazing video. And I think there's a lot of questions lining up now in the chat box, and looking forward to really get answers from the speakers about that. So I'll quickly move, just cautious of time, I'll quickly move to our third speaker today, Professor Tim Unwin. Tim, you're there. So Tim is going to talk about abusing digital tech to innovate in heritage research policy and practice. And Tim is a chairholder, UNESCO chair in ICT 4D Royal Holloway, University of London, and he's a leader in information and communication technologies for development since the field was established 20 years ago. Tim is also co-founder of the Tech Together, an initiative designed to help change men's attitudes and behaviors to women and technology. So welcome, Tim, and the floor is yours, and looking forward to the presentation.
Thanks very much, Jahan, and thank you so much to Gamal, Paul, and Nisatu. Amazing presentations. I feel in what I'm scheduled to say, I'm going to be sort of the guilty conscience behind that, and I'm going to use my digital tech, and I'll put my timer on now so I keep exactly to time. But in terms of what we're talking about, I just want to go back, and these slides are partly to show respect to my previous speakers. But Gamal, I was working almost 50 years ago on analog digital technologies, analog technologies in archaeology. And this is actually also with respect to you in Nottingham, because my PhD in the late 70s was from there. And then with the wonderful video we've just heard, I won't play video, but 10, 15 years ago, we were also working on a storytelling project in West Africa. And here we have an amazing Ghanaian storyteller, and it was in Senegal at the invitation of this gentleman. So again, the use of digital in cultural heritage. But most recently, and probably most strikingly, UNESCO have a project on actually software code is itself heritage. And I could have spoken about all of these three different wonderful examples of the interface between digital and heritage. But instead, what I want to do, as the title suggests, is look in a little more depth in slightly different ways. And again, I guess I really got into architectural preservation in the early 80s when I was working in United Arab Emirates. And there wasn't the digital technology, but we moved from this, the old fort at Fujairah, to how it is today. And it's always fascinated me the ways in which digital tech can be used to support this. And I'd just like to draw your attention, if you don't know, the amazing work of my friend Lorenzo Cantoni here, who holds I always get the title wrong, but it's UNESCO Chair in ICT to develop and promote sustainable tourism in World Heritage Sites. But he's been doing amazing work, and I think there's definitely an opportunity to come out of this conference session to pull these people together. But very briefly, he talks about the ABCDE of ways through which digital technology can support such heritage: giving access, making the experience better, connecting, disintermediating, and educating. And so all of these things are amazingly positive. Please don't go away thinking that I don't think digital tech can make a significant difference to all of those aspects of the use of digital technology in heritage preservation. And I just take sort of one example here, and Gamal and Paul and Nisatu have shown many others, but the way we can use AR and VR to reimagine what ancient monuments were like. You know, when I was back looking at those air photos in the early 70s, I just wanted to imagine what they were going to look like in 3D, and now we can do it. All that having been said, though, I want to make the case for you very strongly in the context of sustainability in UNESCO, the Sustainable Development Goals, but as I think both the previous or three previous speakers hinted, not all is perfect and wonderful with digital technology. And so we have to mitigate the harms that it causes if we're going to let that enormous potential that has been shared with us so wonderfully today so far. And I just want to make sort of 5 points to begin with about the Sustainable Development Goals. I guess there's almost nobody on this session, 164 people, who actually thinks Sustainable Development Goals are a bad thing. I do. I would make a case, and there's not the time to do it here, but I've written a lot about it, why the Sustainable Development Goals are one of the worst things that's actually happened for the poorest and most marginalized people in the world. And just to provoke you with some bullet points, most of the SDGs have failed already. Not least an large number of them don't actually have data to enable us to see whether they've been fulfilled in 2030. So we haven't got the data that would enable us to do that from 2015. But we're not on track for most of these. And I would make a case that the SDGs are actually primarily a vehicle to support the interests of UN agencies. Can anyone ever remember all 17 of them, let alone the targets for each? These are a mechanism through which the UN agencies can promote their contribution to the world. And moreover, a way through which the private sector can say, "Ooh, we're being good, we're contributing to development." And all but one of them is built on the principle of absolute economic growth, that if we can increase the amount of wealth in the world, that will make the world better. Nearly everyone forgets SDG 10, which is on inclusion. Very interesting, COVID-19 has actually promoted much more concern and interest in that, which I think is let's look for the wonderful outcomes of COVID-19. But increasing economic growth is going to leave the poorest and the most marginalized further and further behind. And that is particularly so through the digital technology. We heard terms like the digital divide. But imagine that you have no digital technology and you compare what your life experiences are with somebody who has one of the latest smartphones. And this isn't actually one of the latest ones, so I'm already disadvantaged. Or you just have an old mobile device. Why is it we have to always increase and use the latest and the new technologies to roll out to the poorest and most marginalized people who can't afford it? So I'd just like us to think about challenging that. Because the SDGs, I would suggest, particularly through using digital tech, are driving inequality and are actually thus unsustainable. We're creating an unsustainable world in the name of sustainability. And as we've seen in the wonderful presentations we've had so far, digital tech can, of course, be used to do amazing things, particularly in the field of heritage that we're talking about. So where is the problem with digital tech? Or where are the many problems? Let me just begin here with this image. This is digital tech in a school in Kenya that I was in not so long ago. Is that sustainable? Think about when you last bought a new smartphone. What did you do with the old one? Most digital tech is built on fundamentally unsustainable business models. It's based on planned obsolescence. You have to get a new bit of software when you buy a new bit of hardware. And then, of course, that hardware gets out of date when a new bit of software comes along. And you're always being encouraged to get new technology. And that technology is also incredibly thirsty and demanding for electricity. I'm sure many on this call are familiar with the corporate challenges in made to the right to repair. I have my laptop that I'm using at the moment, the battery has died. I've got to send it away to get a new battery put in. I can't just repair it myself by buying a new battery. And then think of fast fashion. Fast fashion industry has become widely criticized, but it's part of our heritage and culture today. But business of digital tech is also incredibly like fast fashion. I'm old enough to remember the one family phone with dialing up that we had forever. It'd be lovely to do a poll just now and see when everyone on this call last bought a mobile phone. We don't need to do that, but we're being encouraged to think that it's a great thing. And then, of course, not only is there the physical waste and all the implications of that for minerals, etc., but just think of the electricity demand. Bitcoin, the latest figures, Bitcoin alone, not all the other digital currencies as well, uses more electricity than the whole of Argentina. So every time you send an email, you use your digital device, you do some wonderful archaeological reconstruction, you're actually increasing electricity demand. And all of this has a really massive impact on the environment. And that's actually the new project that we're committing ourselves to. We're creating a global coalition of how digital tech influences the environment and what we can do about it. And don't want to get bogged down in climate change, but that is only just part of it. So moving swiftly towards my conclusion, what I'd like to just do is say, landscape is cultural heritage. 30 seconds to go. Is that electricity being generated for that, partly to drive digital tech? Wind turbines at the moment have to be put into landfill sites. So to come to the final slide, whose heritage, and Paul and Isatu did touch this, but whose heritage interest does digital tech serve? Companies building the tech, academics building their careers, rich tourists wanting a tech-mediated experience, tourist agencies who are going to mine the data, and then really with respect to Isatu, from the times I worked in Sierra Leone, or these boys in Sierra Leone. And perhaps going back to those wind towers in Fujairah, Dubai now and UAE, IT security, a UN control. So just some reflections to think about. Don't please think I'm against the use of digital tech in the wonderful ways we heard earlier, but let's just reflect on whether it really is contributing to sustainability or not. And sustainability was in the title of what we're talking about. So thank you very much. I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Tim. Really, that was really fascinating as well. I think we have, just cautious of time as well, I think we have some questions in the chat box. And I do have some questions as well, but I will start with the audience first. The questions are not really directed to a specific presenter, but I think, feel free to grasp any of those to answer them. And I think one of the main issues, in my opinion, is the issue of inequality and the right of the community who are the heritage owners to own this kind of outputs. Where do the outputs go? Who does it belong to? How do we engage with them? And how do we tackle, in terms of policy and practice as well, how do we tackle issues of lack of resources to be able to communicate and engage with the outputs and of the digital heritage that we are producing? So if each of the speakers could just reflect in a minute or two on this issue, and how is it tackled in the case studies and the work ongoing that you have already been talking about today.
So Jan, can I come in, or do we raise our hands to?
Yes.
Yes, I think please. Because you raised the point, I think it was raised in the chat box about accessibility, ownership accessibility to digital resources. Yes. And I think this perhaps about preserve heritage is trade and conflict, similar to what I mentioned. I think it's very important, critical point. And it will be misleading if we think that institutionalized use of technology like governments or heritage institutions or even academia can really preserve and record all heritage. As I mentioned in my presentation, heritage belongs to the community. It's what they do. So what we can do, we can actually, and this is what we have been doing in our research. First action, just to go and work with the communities on the ground, sit down with them and try to mobilize them to use their low-tech devices like mobile phones. So in Mosul, for example, while the historic city is destroyed, but everybody moves with mobile phones. And while people are being displaced or moving out of that historic city, disappear with it, it's art heritage. So what we are doing, we are trying to work with them to record themselves. Traditional practice that instead of having 120 silversmiths or coppersmiths, now you got only 2 or 3. So how to record that before it disappears? In terms of other people, just have been recording the voices, the sound of the old city, just the beggars that who have been walking around, the atmosphere, the environment. There is a lot of things that they disappear slowly following a conflict. So to mobilize them, to work with them, we always rely on what we call local community researchers. There's actually members of the local communities being trained and working with us, attend workshops and record themselves. And then they become the agents of that heritage. And for us to try to use the high-tech and I agree, I totally with Tim there, it's just not sustainable, but they are kind of affordable by institutions and big organizations, which is help bring this together to become an open resource and to be pushed back to the community. So it's actually how to work with communities to record their own heritage and support that from a larger scale governmental system. And I think there's a lot of things to discuss about the ownership and accessibility, but they are all about really community and open access data.
Perhaps I could just come and follow on there. I think what ISA2 and I tried to do in our presentation is to try and address that through a kind of practical example of bridging, as it were, large institutions, that have digital access and resources and so on, and then think about, very kind of mindfully design into these initiatives the kinds of problems that have been raised. So, actually not relying on high bandwidth and access to computers and electricity necessarily. I think Tim's comments are really vitally important, and I suppose the challenge for us all is how to translate that critique into practical action. And I think that's really where we need to think this through, because is this about abandoning the technology because of the scale of the issues, or how? And I think the criticisms of the SDGs and the Millennium Development Goals and so on before that are absolutely they're well. The critique is out there and is actually, I think a lot of us do share in that view about the problems of them. I suppose it's about how do we address their dominance, their continued dominance.
So there's a question on how can we look at the effect, especially on the long term, of utilizing digital technology and heritage, especially in areas of conflict and lower economic areas?
Yeah, I think there are two things that because technology is a tool at the end of the day. It's just a new way of documenting, collecting data. And it's just storing data and recording heritage. It's the primary task for us, especially at the time of conflict. As I mentioned earlier in my talk, we tend to look at heritage only when it is lost, because it exists and inform everything that we do. But once it disappears, then it becomes heritage, and we start to say, okay, it's endangered, and why we haven't kept it when it was in action. And I think what we can do in times of conflict, or even before or after, is just, again, to try to help to record as much as possible, because we know that this is being lost slowly in 20 or 30 years' time, because this is normally during conflict. And by capturing this information, it counters the ideological conflict in the first place. And I think the whole region beyond our interest in digital technology in conflict areas is how it countered tourism in a way. Because when Mosul was destroyed because Daesh and the terrorism action, who would like to really erase layers where a diverse city like Mosul was lots of Christians, lots of Jews, lots of different sects of Muslims were in action, then heritage started to be destroyed deliberately. And then now, with time, they will never exist. And happened that before in Bosnia, and happened that before in Turkey, and will continue to happen. So we capture the data, work with them to capture their lives, their practices, their cultural practice. So this is the first point of departure. Then once we store them, this become an accessible resource. And I totally agree that we need to become more sustainable, more facilitators. how this translates into education, into knowledge that's shared with many people who will come generation after generation in these places. So educate us about how bad the conflict was, how it raised a culture and practice that should have really remained, and in a way that's actually telling people the value of diversity and culture, inclusion, and lots of other things. And hence my initial point about heritage is about knowledge. It's about really the cultural diversity. It's about lots of things that embed in our values as human beings. Its disappearance, and if you don't capture it through technology now, they will disappear forever. And then we'll be going back, looking back centuries, why we didn't capture that at the time. What we're going to do with resources, this is a lot of debate on how to can be reproduced and reconstructed later on.
Jehan, can I just add very briefly? I absolutely completely agree with Gamal. I would only add we mustn't forget the power relationships involved in this. And I think heritage is also about power. Whose power? I mean, certain things historically have been kept. Others have been destroyed by powerful entities. Take the Reformation in the UK, and the destruction of the monasteries, for example, in the 16th century. But if that's always been the same, what's changed now? And perhaps it is we're able to record a huge amount more. But again, I come back to whose interest is that recording taking place? Is it the rich and the powerful, or the poorest and the most marginalized? And I think we have the potential to bring all of that together, and projects like you and Paul Isatu are working on, which are working with some of the poorest people to actually create that data and information. But that brings the question of the power of curating. Who is curating? Who is getting access to it? There is so much material out there on the net, for example. Who's going to access it? How are they going to access it? What are they going to use it for? So there are. I mean, I love what you've all said, but I think let's just bring in that power dynamic, and because I think what we're arguing is that we want to change that. Isatu and Paul and you are very much wanting to change traditional power dynamics and using tech to do that, which I definitely applaud. But one of the ironies is, of course, that tech is about strengthening the power of the most powerful, not the weakest. So it's partly how we use tech to deconstruct that.
Isatu, do come in, because I think the point. One of the points we were trying to make was to not fetishize the digital, and to come back to Gamal's point about it's a tool. And sometimes it's a tool for actually, bringing real life, as it were, face-to-face engagement together. Maybe, Isatu, you have something to say about that in the Sierra Leonean context.
Yeah, well, I have to start off by saying I agree with what Gamal said, and of course, team, your thought-provoking arguments are worthy to note. In Sierra Leone, in the Sierra Leonean context, and using Sierra Leone as an example of a country that is very much challenged in accessing technology, very low access to internet service. Most communities are not connected to the electricity grid, and even the use of software is very much limited. The knowledge of technology is very limited. Now, so how do you go about mitigating against all of these challenges to have somewhat a satisfactory use of digital technology in heritage? As we have demonstrated in our case studies, the challenges are very real, but you still have to come up with creative ideas, because we cannot just afford to sit out this digital age, we cannot just afford. We have to find ways to mitigate. So, one of the ways that in Sierra Leone they've been trying to offset this is by working with some of the internet providers to give some special concession to like school kids to have cheaper access to the internet, and give special rates to school kids and stuff like that, and to make some of the resources available offline, like Paul tried to do in his reanimation project, to provide resources on DVDs and stuff like that. But with regards to operating in a conflict area, what Kamal said is very key. We have to start recording our heritage,
because they are so vulnerable to conflict. Without proper record of what was before, it will be hard to know what was lost in the first place and how to maybe recapture what was lost. But the challenge now is that with limited resources devoted to heritage in countries like ours, we are caught in a vicious cycle of this poverty wherein we do not record our heritage. They are vulnerable to conflict, and when they're lost forever,
Yeah, Gamal, if you have just half a minute, because we need to.
No, just I wanted to highlight there's plenty of questions and points of discussions that could really continue for the next 1 hour, which is related to our conversation here, but hopefully just we'll do it later. Sorry, thanks, Jihan.
Yeah. So actually, the chat box is really scrolling very quickly, and I'm losing track of the questions, and that's really helpful. But sadly, we won't be able to answer those. But feel free to take some of those questions in the breakout rooms that you're going to now, and maybe that could be a basis of valuable discussion to be carried on and continued there. So I'll hand over to Tilly and Francesca just to hand over for the managing the breakout rooms and how that's going to take place.
Yes, we're lucky to have James Bridge with us, so he will report on our group. Thanks a lot, James.
Thank you, Gamal. What I'll do is I'll report back question by question as the debate is structured. So we had an extremely interesting debate, and the first question, and thank you, Chair and Rapporteur. The first question is, how can the use of digital technologies innovate in heritage research policy and practice for sustainable development? A top theme here is the promotion of local technologies and recognising the innovation around the world. And this is something that had been reported back, and bearing in mind the really good description by Professor Unwin, we must really focus on the ownership of local technology by people who are leapfrogging Western powers. And they own this, and these are their voices saying this. So this is very important. We do understand that Professor Unwin was not saying that, that is a thing that needs to be ignored when we're talking about the monopolies of global digital power, but really strong emphasis of that. And some of that's been highlighted in the projects today, and also, for example, in the report, Innovation in Cultural Heritage, Opportunities for International Development. The next point is accessibility. Accessibility, key for so many. Many, in fact, whilst there's the leapfrogging, many are disempowered as well. And this needs to be brought in through education policies, through systematic investment as well. And again, the link back to local ownership. Now, going to the darker side of it, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So when Facebook, Alphabet, who own Google, the other huge companies that control our lives in so many ways, yes, they empower. Yes, we use them. People, the 2 billion Facebook users use them. However, the data can be sucked out of local communities, just like in the past arguments around multinational corporations. And the example was given by the chair of what just happened in Australia. And if this can happen with a huge, rich country like Australia, heaven help countries with less negotiating power. But we also spoke about innovators and regulators and governments who are seeking to address this as well, and to empower small and medium-sized enterprises who can provide products and solutions. The experts in this call, museums, and in fact, the network of UNESCO creative cities and working with museums, World Heritage Sites, geoparks and biospheres. We have many of them in this conference. Partnerships is key. Really, this is what I just referred to, but it's about getting together in this way, ironically using digital technology in order to create lists and examples of best practice. Again, that's in the Cultural Heritage Innovation Report and the reports of other colleagues in this call. Next question. What policy change would you like to see on this topic, UK internationally or at UNESCO? Well, there needs to be effective regulation of global information technology monopolies, but at the same time, encouraging innovation. What we don't want to do is to walk blind into the day you look up and you're completely dependent and there's nothing much you can do because data information is controlled by a few monopolies, probably outside your country. You've got no democratic or economic control. On the other hand, if you can create the structures, work with them, negotiate effectively, it's about the local empowerment. You know, there's a real democratization of voices as well through the web. And as you know, with Tim Berners-Lee, the web basically is free, in fact. So it's ways of being smart and not sucked into the replacement built-in fallibility culture that Professor Unwin so accurately wrote about or spoke about. Again, access to technology, training, access to empowering people to have a say over their own narrative. This has just been an ongoing theme of this conference. And then briefly on the last question, what kind of future research and practical actions are needed? Again, it's the encouragement of local innovation, people being able to, again, use the web to promote their work around the world, to have best practice collections. So research can actually be made into compiling what works, sharing it, promoting it. Also research into the links between heritage and technology in the sense of systematic research and the partnerships we spoke about, using existing structures. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, links with schools, young people, etc. And again, just to emphasize, there does have to be effective regulation and control of some of these digital monopolies in order to make sure that they empower and don't suck information away. So it's about effective negotiation with them and recognizing that heritage, the narrative, even the data itself and the language of digital is heritage. And this is something where we have something to say. So with that, Chair and colleagues, if I've missed anything, the Chair has promised to come in. So thank you very much.